To my beautiful daughter Morgan. For finally giving this family an heir, my father shouted, handing the vintage Rolex. Then he turned to me, his voice dripping with pity loud enough for the whole party to hear. Maybe next lifetime. Sweetheart. Not everyone is built to be a mother. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood there, knowing my 7-month-old son was sitting in the driveway, hidden in my car, because I was told his existence would ruin the aesthetic. Before I tell you what happened when I finally opened my mouth, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. I'd love to know who's standing with me tonight. 30 minutes before my father raised that glass, I was sitting in the passenger seat of our truck, watching my chest rise and fall in the side mirror, trying to force air into lungs that felt too tight. In the back seat, Leo was fast asleep, his tiny chest moving in a rhythm that usually calmed me. But today, it just made me feel sick. My husband, Nathan, gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. He looked at the sprawling estate in front of us, then back at me, his eyes pleading. We don't have to do this. Alyssa, he said, his voice low and hard. We can turn around right now. We can go get burgers, take Leo to the park, and forget these people exist. I wanted to say yes. God. I wanted to say yes. But the old habit, the one ingrained in me since childhood, was too strong. It's a big day for Dad, I said, reciting the script I'd been memorizing for weeks. He's excited. If I don't show up, I'm the bad guy. I'm the one who doesn't care about family. Nathan looked at the rearview mirror. At our son. They told you to leave him in the car. Liz. Who does that? What kind of family makes you choose between being a daughter and being a mother? It's just a no-kids rule, I argued, fixing my lipstick in the visor mirror, though my hand was shaking. It's a high-end party. There's breakable crystal. It's not personal. That was the lie I told myself. It's the lie every scapegoat tells themselves to survive. You see, when you grow up in a house where love is rationed like water during a drought, you stop recognizing thirst. You start convincing yourself that the hunger pangs are normal. That's the trap of normalizing cruelty. You become an expert at translation. When they say, "You're too emotional," you translate it to, "I need to be stronger." When they say, "Your son can't come inside," you translate it to, "They just want a sophisticated atmosphere." You don't see the malice, because if you admitted the malice was real, you'd have to admit that the people who are supposed to love you actually enjoy hurting you. And that truth is too heavy to carry. So you carry their excuses instead. I kissed Nathan's cheek, promised him I'd only stay for an hour, and stepped out of the truck. The gravel crunched under my heels as I walked toward the house. A sound that felt like a countdown. The estate was breathtaking, transformed into something out of a magazine spread. I walked through the French doors and the smell hit me first. Expensive perfume and imported lilies. My sister, Morgan, had told me the budget for this sip and see was $85,000. Standing there, I believed it. There were arches of white roses that had been flown in from Holland that morning. A string quartet played softly in the corner. Waiters circulated with trays of hors d'oeuvres that looked like art. And in the center of it all was Morgan. She sat on a velvet settee like a queen holding court. Her blonde hair perfectly waved, accepting gifts and adoration, with the gracious nod of someone who has never known a day of being second best. She looked radiant. She looked perfect. And as I stood on the periphery, clutching my purse to hide the fact that my hands were trembling, I realized I wasn't a guest at all. I was a prop. I was here to witness the coronation, not to share in the kingdom. But even then, standing in the shadow of $85,000 worth of validation for my sister, I told myself it would be okay. I told myself that once Dad saw me, once he hugged me, it would count for something. I was so wrong. The party reached a fever pitch as the sun began to dip, casting long, golden shadows across the lawn. The string quartet shifted to something upbeat, and the champagne flowed as if the bottles were bottomless. I had managed to survive 45 minutes. I had smiled until my face ached. I had dodged questions about my career and nodded politely when aunts asked why I looked so tired, biting back the urge to scream that I was tired because my 7-month-old was teething and I had been up since 4:00 a.m. I was just checking my watch, calculating the exact second I could slip away without causing a scene. When the music stopped, Morgan stood on the stone steps of the terrace, a microphone in one hand and her baby bump perfectly framed by the setting sun. She tapped the mic, a sharp feedback whine cutting through the chatter. "Attention, everyone," she cooed, her voice amplified and saccharine. "I have so many people to thank today. My wonderful husband, my amazing parents. But there is one person I want to recognize specially." The crowd turned. I felt a cold prickle of dread at the base of my spine. Morgan's eyes found me, locking on with a gaze that feigned supreme compassion. "My sister, Alyssa," she said, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper that was somehow louder than a shout. "I know how incredibly difficult today must be for you. We all know about your struggles." The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. 50 pairs of eyes pivoted toward me. I could see the pity in them, the morbid curiosity. Morgan continued, placing a protective hand over her own belly. "It takes so much strength to celebrate a new life when your own arms are empty. I just want you to know, Liz, that we are all praying for your miracle. Even if God's plan is different for you, you'll always be the best auntie." It was a masterclass in assassination. In 3 sentences, she had painted me as the barren, pitied spinster, publicly airing a tragedy that didn't even exist. She had weaponized my silence against me. The guests murmured, sympathetic noises. "Poor thing," I heard a cousin whisper. "It must be heartbreaking." I stood frozen, the blood roaring in my ears. I waited for my father to step in. I waited for him to take the mic, to tell her that was inappropriate, to defend his daughter. Instead, Richard walked over to me. He placed a heavy hand on my shoulder, giving it a squeeze that felt less like comfort and more like a restraint. He leaned in, smelling of expensive scotch and indifference. "Don't make a scene, Alyssa," he muttered, low enough that only I could hear. "Morgan's just trying to include you. Try to look happy for her. For once." That was it. That was the moment. It wasn't a snap, really. It was a click, like a lock finally sliding into place after years of jiggling the key. The grief I had been carrying, the grief of being unloved, unseen, and unworthy evaporated. It was replaced by something freezing cold and diamond hard. I looked at my father, really looked at him, and realized I wasn't looking at a patriarch. I was looking at a fool. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't throw my drink. I laughed. It started low in my throat. A dry, humorless sound that cut through the murmuring crowd. It wasn't a laugh of joy. It was the sound of a woman who realizes the joke is on everyone else. The pity on the guests' faces faltered. Morgan's smile twitched. My father's hand dropped from my shoulder, as if I were burning hot. "You're right, Morgan," I said, my voice steady, carrying without a microphone. "God certainly has a plan." I turned on my heel and walked away. I didn't look back at the confused faces. I didn't look back at the $85,000 lie. I walked straight through the garden, past the imported flowers, and onto the gravel driveway. The air outside the estate felt cleaner, sharper. I pulled my phone from my clutch and typed a single message to Nathan, who was parked around the corner with the engine running and our son in the back seat. "Drive. We're done." The drive home was silent. But it wasn't a peaceful silence. It was the heavy, pressurized silence of a bomb squad analyzing a live wire. Nathan gripped the steering wheel, his jaw working, muttering curses every few miles. "I'm going back," he said eventually, his voice thick with the urge to protect. I'm going back there, and I'm going to put your father through a wall." "No," I said. My voice surprised me. It wasn't shaky. It wasn't tearful. It was flat. It was the voice I used when I testified in court regarding embezzlement cases. "You aren't going to do anything. We aren't going to fight them with anger. Nate, anger is messy. Anger makes mistakes. We're going to fight them with data." When we walked into our house, I didn't go to the nursery to cry over my son. I handed Leo to our nanny, who was staying late, and walked straight to my home office. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. I felt a strange, cold clarity settling over me, displacing the hurt. This is what I do. I am a forensic accountant. I trace disappearing money. I uncover hidden assets. I find the truth buried in mountains of lies. And for the first time in 31 years, I stopped looking at Richard and Morgan as my father and sister. I looked at them as subjects in an investigation. "Nate," I said, logging into my secure server. "I need the logs." Nathan is a tech security specialist. He sat beside me, cracking his knuckles, his anger channeling into focus. We shared a family cloud account with my father, something I'd set up years ago to help him manage his photos. It was the back door we needed, accessing the backup for Dad's iPhone. Nate muttered, typing furiously. "Let's see why he never answered your calls." It took 10 minutes to download the system logs. We scrolled through the data, looking for the timeline of my pregnancy. I had sent 12 text messages to my father during those 9 months. Ultrasound photos, the gender reveal video, the birth announcement. "There," Nate pointed to the screen. "Look at the receipt status. Deleted, deleted, deleted." But it wasn't just deletions. We dug deeper into the settings. Configuration history. 8 months ago, 2 weeks after I announced my pregnancy, a modification was made to my father's contact list. My number hadn't just been ignored. It had been routed to a silent folder, blocked from notifications, and hidden from the main view. "Who made the change?" I asked. Though I already knew. Nate traced the device ID. It wasn't his phone. It was authorized from a secondary device, Morgan's iPad Pro. The rage I expected didn't come. Instead, I felt a click of satisfaction. It was proof. Morgan hadn't just influenced him. She had digitally severed the line. But we weren't done. I opened Facebook. I had been blocked from viewing Morgan's profile for years. She claimed she didn't use social media much, but Nate had a burner account for security testing. We navigated to her page. It was a shrine to her perfect life. But as we scrolled back 7 months, to the week Leo was born, we found it. A post with a black background. A long, weeping caption. "Please pray for my sister Alyssa today. We received the most heartbreaking news. Sometimes, God calls his angels home before they even take a breath. We are devastated by the loss of what would have been my nephew. Please respect our family's privacy during this tragic time." I stared at the screen. I stared at the 3,000 likes. I stared at the hundreds of comments offering condolences for a baby who was currently sleeping in the next room. "She told them he died," Nate whispered, his face draining of color. "She told the whole world our son was dead." I leaned back in my chair. The tears finally dried up completely. She didn't just tell them. "Nate, look at the link in the bio." I clicked it. It was a GoFundMe page. The link opened to a page washed in soft pastels and angel wings. The title was bold and tragic. "Memorial Fund for my sister's angel." Below it was a stolen ultrasound photo. My ultrasound photo. The one I had texted to my father 8 months ago. The one I thought he had ignored. I read the description. My forensic brain dissecting the text, while my stomach turned to stone. Morgan had written a masterpiece of fiction. She described holding my hand while I wept. She described a funeral that never happened. She described a tiny white casket. She claimed that I was so shattered by grief that I had been committed to a mental health facility and could not work, leaving me drowning in medical bills. She asked for help, and people had answered. The donation counter sat at $52,400. I scrolled through the donor list. There were names I recognized. Cousins from the East Coast. My father's business partners. My high school friends. People who thought they were paying for my son's headstone were actually funding Morgan's lifestyle. Look at the withdrawal history, I said, my voice sounding hollow in the quiet office. Where did the money go? Nathan's fingers flew across the keyboard. Because Morgan had accessed the account on the shared family iPad. The banking cash was still accessible. He pulled up the transfer logs. The $52,000 hadn't gone to a hospital. It hadn't gone to a funeral home. It had been transferred in 3 large lump sums to an account labeled Morgan Personal. Trace the outflows from that account, I commanded. 2 days later. A wire transfer of $25,000 to Lake Geneva Estate Events. Another transfer of $12,000 to Lux Floral Design. She paid for her party with my dead son, I whispered. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The champagne. The imported lilies. The vintage Rolex. It was all paid for by the sympathy of people grieving a child who was currently drooling on his crib sheet. It was grotesque. It was predatory. But we weren't done. The forensic accountant in me knew that fraud is rarely an isolated incident. It is a habit. If she was willing to fake a death for $50,000, what else had she done? Check the trust, I said. Grandmother's trust fund. The one Dad manages. My grandmother had left a substantial trust for all her grandchildren, to be distributed upon our 30th birthdays, or for major life events, like buying a home or having a child. I had never touched mine. I wanted to save it for Leo's education. My father was the trustee. We accessed the trust files in the cloud. 6 months earlier, a withdrawal request had been approved for $250. 000, my entire share. The justification was a forged psychiatric letter, claiming I was mentally incapacitated by severe postpartum psychosis. It transferred power of attorney to my sister, Morgan. My signature was forged. But the authorization releasing the funds was real. It was my father's. Nathan was shaking with anger. I studied the date. Morgan had told him I was institutionalized. Backed it with a fake doctor's note. And he signed because believing I was sick was easier than believing his golden child was a criminal. This was no longer a family conflict, it was wire fraud. Identity theft. And grand larceny. I didn't call the police. I booked a private room at the most expensive steakhouse in Lake Geneva. The next night, my father and Morgan arrived, expecting reconciliation. Instead, they sat across from a projector. Slide 1 showed my number blocked on my father's phone, authorized by Morgan's iPad. Slide 2 showed the sympathy card Morgan sent me for my supposed miscarriage, matched to her public post, announcing my loss. I told my father the truth, my son was alive. Slide 3 exposed the GoFundMe Morgan, created in my son's name, funneling donations into party expenses. You paid for your party with my dead son, I said. The final slide displayed the forged psychiatric letter and my father's signature. He stared at it in silence. Then the screen switched to a live nursery feed. My son slept peacefully in his crib. My father broke. Not from remorse, but from the collapse of the lie he had built his identity on. He had to face that he wasn't deceived, he was complicit. Nathan opened the door and told Morgan to leave. 6 months later, the legal consequences were swift. Morgan faces multiple felony charges. Her assets are frozen. My father sold the estate to repay the trust and sent me the money and her Rolex. I kept the money for my son. I returned the watch. My life is quiet now. Solid. And to anyone still waiting on the edge of a family photo, stop waiting. You are not a supporting character. Sometimes, the only way to save your life is to walk away and write them out of the story. If you've ever had to leave to survive, share this. Family is defined by respect, not blood.